I would just like to thank you all so much for coming. I am Katrina Heil. I'm the Interim Director of Women's Gender and Sexuality Studies. And we are just so delighted to welcome Brittany Butler here today to give us this talk which she's titling Fostering Science Identity, Empowering Students in STEM Fields. And I just wanted to say a couple words of introduction, and then I'm going to pass it over to you, Brittany. Butler is going to be talking about the role of science identity in the academic and professional development of students who are pursuing STEM disciplines. Science identity is defined as an individual's sense of belonging, engagement, and self-concept as a scientist, and it plays a significant role in influencing students' attitudes, motivations, and aspirations within STEM fields. Butler graduated with a bachelor's degree of science in chemistry and a minor in Spanish. Muy bien. I'm also a Spanish teacher at ETSU from Loyola University in New Orleans. And then she received her master's in science in analytic chemistry at UNC Chapel Hill. And Butler is currently a doctoral candidate in educational leadership and policy analysis at ETSU. So congratulations on that. I don't want to steal any more time from you, so I will pass the mic over to you. But just real quick, let me just say that if any of you are attending for a lecture series credit with John Ellis, please just send your name in the chat, and we will keep a list for Dr. Ellis. All right, thank you so much. Brittany, pass it on to you.
Thank you. Oh, good. Okay, I got to find my voice here. Thank you so much for that introduction. I'm really excited to speak with you all today. And so I'm a senior lecturer in the Department of Chemistry here at ETSU, but I'm also a faculty affiliate with the Center for Teaching Excellence. And in the work that I've done with the CTE, and in my work with the Educational Leadership and Policy Analysis program, I've come across a lot of themes and issues related to STEM. Mainly with the CTE, we started reading several books. One, Unraveling Faculty Burnout, Picture a Professor, Inclusive Teaching, Grading for Equity. And they all kind of say the same thing. One, it's hard to reach, retain, and encourage students in STEM, period. But it's especially hard, one, at the college level and for underrepresented minorities and women. And so it set me on this path of sort of, how did I get here? So how did I sort of make it through? And one thing that kept coming up was this idea of science identity and how important it is for students to think of themselves as a scientist or think of themselves as belonging in a scientific field. And so I'm going to talk just a little bit about science identity and then some of the things that we can do as instructors or in higher education in general to support students and foster this idea of belonging from the STEM perspective. And so, right, everyone pretty much knows STEM: science, technology, engineering, math. Even though those fields have a higher expected pay and job security is really, really good in those fields, there's still a shortage of qualified individuals. Even students who do pursue STEM majors in college, oftentimes they change those majors before graduation, and just the interest in some of these fields just remains low. And so a lot of that has to do with confidence, students believing they can do well in these what's often portrayed as very difficult fields. And so it's important in higher education that we not only recruit students, but retain them. And so the role of identity development and values in STEM retention is one that is also important. And I thought that this was just interesting. Researchers found that confidence, just confidence in a chemistry 2 class was directly related to course grade and overall retention in STEM majors. And so these students who made, let's say, an A in chemistry 2, which is only the second chemistry class that you take as a chemistry major, they had more confidence, earned a higher grade. They proceeded through other courses with more confidence, and they were less likely to leave STEM. And so this is good news for students who feel like they belong. They gain that confidence pretty early on. But the flip side of this is that for students who either start off with a poor grade or don't feel as confident in some of these earlier courses, don't feel like they belong and then may leave the STEM field, leave the courses, or in extreme cases, leave higher education altogether. And so this concept of STEM identity, why does it matter? And so again, excuse me. And so it has to do with your self-concept, how you think of yourself, and how other people are perceiving you. It refers to the degree to which individuals perceive themselves as having a role or with the, and I'll use these two terms interchangeably a little bit, STEM identity or science identity, but how do they feel that they belong or do not belong in this field? And so historically, STEM, science, technology, math, it's been pretty homogeneous, and we can see several pictures here. Generally, well-to-do socioeconomic, high socioeconomic status, white males make up the majority of some of the most well-known scientists in the past. And so there's a serious lack of representation. And in today's climate, I feel faculty and students are looking and asking, where can I see myself? Right. So reproducing this image and carrying on this particular image of the rich white male in STEM contributes to the marginalization of a substantial group of potential learners. And so if students can't see themselves among what has come before in terms of scientific work, then it just becomes that much more difficult for students to engage in science, want to participate in science, and then work in science. And so marginalization, it goes obviously from a gender basis. There's only two or three women on this slide. And then in terms of non-binary persons, people with disabilities, people from diverse and ethnic and racial backgrounds. And so, again, mentioning those books earlier, I found that there's a disproportionate number of women of color, even among those underrepresented groups, that don't persist in STEM or don't enter STEM at the same rates as their white or male counterparts. And that's due to a host of interpersonal factors, different social factors, but it all contributes to this lack of social belonging. If you can't visualize yourself in this picture, then it will be very difficult to have that confidence to do well. And so women of color also disproportionately experience microaggressions when they do enter into these STEM fields. And you can imagine, even on the graduate school level, when I was at UNC Chapel Hill, I was one of two, I think I was one of two women of color in my entering class of like 150 graduate students in the chemistry department. And it brings up a lot of questions about your presence in a particular area if you don't see a lot of people like you, if you don't see that representation. And so microaggressions, along with being racially harassed or in terms of gender sexually harassed, right? It all puts up barriers. Um, and so some progress has been made in this area. And even, we do have two individuals here, Marie Curie and Neil deGrasse Tyson. Those are two individuals that I have um, looked to in terms of representation. And I would say that I have a really strong science identity, so strong that these are my last two Halloween costumes from 2022 and 2023. So unfortunately, my students didn't know who I was, so I had to create these side by sides. But right, I mean, you do what you can, right? You try to find yourself the the history, and so I just thought that was fun. But and so some progress has been made. Um, a lot of this information is from, so at least the National Science Foundation has just completed a very detailed report looking at the United States STEM workforce. And so there has been progress in the last 10 years or so with increased representation of women and underrepresented minorities. But if you notice, a lot of that progress has been in the social and behavioral sciences, with women having a majority, 66%, 67%. So um, greater than the sort of 51% population of women. So earning bachelor's, master's in those particular fields. But if you look at the degree recipients in physical or earth sciences, math, computer sciences, and engineering, it's still women are still underrepresented among these degree recipients at all degree levels. And so why does this matter? Again, what's the sort of goal? If we can get greater participation of women, of non-binary individuals, right, a diversity of individuals, there's all of the research, and it's been proven time and time again that a diverse workforce just provides more variety of perspectives, outlooks, and it helps develop new questions and approaches and interpretations of work. And I believe that, and that does apply to any field, but especially in the STEM fields. And so, in looking at this, there's several researchers who have looked at modeling or describing this science identity. And in one particular um, paper I saw has this model of science identity that kind of starts at the bottom with your incorporating your racial, ethnic, and gender identities, but having that lead into competence. And so if a person can have confidence and support, or have support in their knowledge and understanding of science, so that's like getting your A in general chemistry too, that builds a person's science identity that they can then take into performance, and the specific skills of that person, can they use the tools of a scientist? And then once those two have been formulated, then recognition of yourself as a science person, and being recognized by others as a science person. And this was actually interesting with recognition. It's not just your professors or the person on the street. They made a point to mention meaningful others. So it has to be individuals like family, close friends, or people whose opinion matters to you. If those meaningful others view you as a science person, then you have this science identity, and would rate yourself high on a scale of um, rate yourself high on being a science person, and others would as well. And so there's different degrees of confidence, right? We all know that our identities are constantly changing, but particularly in an educational setting, our identities are influenced by our peers, by other personal identities that we have. Home environment plays a large role, and then, of course, teachers and educators. Um, and so, looking at how we view ourselves and how others view us can make a real impact. And I'll talk a little bit about this later, but it doesn't start in college, right? And so, looking at some of the research and preparation from this, a lot of research has been conducted on when this science identity starts or first introduced. And one thing that does come up is when that science identity is lost. And for a lot of girls, for math and science, by the age of 12 is the point at which we lose a lot of girls being interested in STEM. And so there's a host of reasons for that as well. But one interesting thing I found, this one study asked, I don't think it was this one, but asked over like 4,000 children, what does a scientist look like to you? Draw a picture of a scientist. And they looked at the drawings of boys and girls. And so early research on this sort of children's perspective of scientists, right, found that most children have this gendered stereotype perception of scientists. And so there's this very masculine image of science that gets carried on. And children have a stereotypical picture of scientists as being male. And so this one's interesting. This little bubble here says, I am smarter than you in every way. I am a genius. And so this is what children thought of your typical science, right? And so I definitely try not to be that way or say this in my classes, but there were several stereotypes that kept coming up. Male gender being one, lab coat, glasses, mean expression or not smiling, crazy hair, which I do have that sometimes, works in lab work. And then, so the question is, where are these images coming from? And obviously, we know, TV. And so, a lot of the students who drew these pictures, these stereotypical pictures of scientists, noted that television and film is where they get a lot of their ideas. And so, again, it just goes back to that issue and importance of representation. What is society pushing as this concept of a science person? And I thought it was interesting to try and just see, okay, well, what are some of these media images that are out there? And these are sort of my favorites mixed in with some other well-known, but we have so I think the closest one to our drawing here might be Doc Brown from Back to the Future with the crazy hair and absent-minded professor sort of thing there. But Walter White is always a favorite of students, and Futurama, Hubert, Dr. Farnsworth there. I'll talk about Dana Scully here in a second. I never watched Bones, but this was another good one. She was a forensic anthropologist, and Dr. Brennan, and had very feminist, positive images of women in science and as leaders. And then, of course, our Dr. McCoy and Spock. And so these are just some of the media images. But Dr. or Agent Dana Scully is from X-Files, a 90s TV show. And her presence in that role actually started something called the Scully effect. And so a social phenomenon named after her character, who was a doctor in the show and an FBI agent. And initially it was thought, oh, that's just, an anecdote to whatever, but it actually was studied, small study, 2,000 participants. But if anyone was familiar with the show, they said that it was an inspiration for them to either get into STEM or pursue a STEM career. And the phenomenon involved a substantial increase in the number of women becoming interested in STEM or joining STEM fields because of this character on television. And so, again, back in the 90s, most of the scientists portrayed on television were primarily white men. And just having this character as breaking the mold and showing a different side was impactful. I could not find a Doc McStuffins effect, but I'm sure it's coming. A popular Disney TV show, this one showed a little African American girl who would play doctor with her stuffed animals. And I could imagine, again, no data, but I could imagine, this being inspirational to also young African American girls to pursue medicine or some other field related to healthcare because they can see themselves in those roles without too much difficulty. And so, what does a well-defined science identity do for students at each stage? If a middle schooler is interested in STEM, has a positive, confident science identity, they're having this growing awareness and connection to science and building confidence in their abilities. And at the middle school stage, curiosity is probably most important, and being comfortable asking questions, especially once we get to the college stage. A lot of times it's scary to ask questions. And high schoolers, a well-defined science identity, you're building a stronger commitment to science, starting to formulate yourself as a science person, and you can see a potential future. Your interests get a little more specialized. Do you like biology? Do you like math, engineering? And then maybe participate in extracurricular activities related to STEM. And you can actually start to visualize yourself as a professional in some scientific or STEM field. And by the time you get to college, if your science identity has been supported throughout, then you'll have a clear and informed understanding of your role as a science person and how you can help or participate or see yourself in the scientific community. And so that's when you start researching, maybe going out into the community, and these other outside individuals start to consider you as a science person. And so you're engaging in more specified scientific work. Right, but when a mismatch occurs, and it can occur at any level, this is what hampers or even prevents students continuing in STEM. And so peer pressure to conform to societal norms, looking at, for example, women in STEM, often around that age 12, middle school age, they're either not encouraged in math or science or even steered away from it by well-meaning teachers or parents. There's the stereotypical fields that are quote unquote open to women, and they are then encouraged to go into those fields as opposed to some STEM fields. There's also feelings of alienation that can occur, feeling like an outsider. Let's say if you're in a robotics club in high school or want to join a club in high school and you're the only person of color or you're the only female. There's often a stereotype threat that can arise, I think, at any level, but maybe more so at the college level, where there's this mismatch between your personal identity and the stereotypical image of a scientist. And so, stereotype threat, the person fears enforcing a stereotype about their gender or race or socioeconomic status. They fear confirming that with their social group and therefore doubt their ability And some studies have even shown they score, it affects how people perform on like math tests and right individual assessments of learning. So the lack of role models in STEM makes it difficult for girls and underrepresented individuals to see themselves pursuing STEM careers. And once you get to college, it's often right. You think of the people who have historically persisted in these STEM fields, those are the individuals who are teaching the classes. And so by the time you get to college, the undergraduate students are generally exposed to dominant white male professors in the course of their STEM education. And so they are once again limited in the people they see who could possibly look like them. And so, what can we as instructors or um, participants at this higher education college level do? We have to consider science as a community of practice. And so this is a interesting quote that I saw. If we view science as a community of practice in which aspiring members must be enculturated, then it's essential that we understand how neophytes affiliate with, how they become alienated from, and or negotiate the cultural norms within these communities. And this alludes to this idea of bringing your whole self to work or bringing your whole self to the class. Um, I believe up till recently, if you think of those who have succeeded in these fields, like Neil deGrasse Tyson, for example, he had a very prominent role model, Carl Sagan, who helped him from the age of, I think, 9, who helped him navigate the scientific community and be the success that he is today. And so you really have to bring people into this community of practice in order to have folks persist and retain those individuals. So having early positive experiences and exposure to STEM is really important. Um, Early childhood education, I know ETSU is doing a lot with STEM innovation and having STEM materials available for local teachers. Mentorship and role models can foster early interest in science and just nurturing that. But inclusion and support are also important, and having environments where students are given I would say, given the time and the space to develop their social or their science identity. And so we have to ask ourselves, are our STEM environments still aligned with those historical masculine norms? And in particular in chemistry, right, there's still this notion, I would say it still exists, of like the weed out courses, right? I used to teach, not so much anymore, but I used to teach organic chemistry. And whenever I said that, there was even from President Nolan, he said, oh, after organic 1, that's when I changed my major to political science. That's usually the course that does everyone in. And so this is still sort of right, not where we want to be in terms of supporting students, and aligned with sort of older models of what these STEM environments should be. And having these concepts of only the most competent can excel is just not true, because there's so many other factors that go into a student's performance on formative and summative assessments. Things like looking at an instructor's grading practices. What are the students' responsibilities outside of class? And again, that socioeconomic piece, if students have to work part-time or even full-time while going to class, all of those things are going to affect their performance, but it doesn't necessarily speak to their competence or ability to do well in a particular major or field. And so engaging students in authentic scientific practices, things that involve problem solving, inquiry, again, how allowing students to ask questions and to make mistakes, right? Mistakes are a very important part of the learning process. And if you have these sort of um, high stress, very technical classes that do exist in several STEM fields, right? Do you have two high stakes exams, a midterm and a final, for students to show their mastery of an entire semester's worth of material? Or are you doing frequent, often assessments where the instructor can offer feedback and encouragement? And so changing these understanding of an instructor's scientific practice and the student's understanding of the scientific process will all contribute to building and strengthening a scientific identity. Excuse me. But again, having positive social interactions. Again, it's difficult to find role models and people who serve as mentors often have mentees that look like them or are related to them or similar to them in some sort of way. And so when you're dealing with an underrepresentation of of students or even in the workforce, an underrepresentation based on so many different factors, it's hard for people to find mentors. But the social identity is tied very closely to a person's self-concept and their individual beliefs about how their confidence and their self-efficacy, how that displays in scientific domains. And so having frequent feedback and positive experience and places you can go to interact with other scientists in this case is very important to building that science identity. And so just a couple of tangible things that I found, and this is one I would like to try to implement, but many times when you implement things for inclusion or equity, it ends up helping everyone. And so you can help all students see themselves in science as science. This is one, a s- I think it's like a monthly assignment, but Scientist Spotlights initiatives. So this was funding where there's a website where teachers can go and find biographies of scientists in several different fields and have engage students in reflective writing to teach them not only about sort of the technical aspect of what each scientist was doing, but it promotes diversity and inclusion by sharing the work and um, sort of where these people have pioneered in their fields, and empower science educators to implement equity and inclusion into their classrooms, where if you look in a typical science textbook, you're going to see that first picture we saw way back where it's all European wealthy men who make up a large portion of the history of chemistry, at least I know, in terms of a lot of the laws and theories and things that science is based on. But by incorporating different genders, races, nationalities, right, this can help students see themselves in the work that they may want to do. And so this provides easy access to different activities and assignments that links the stories, content to the stories, a counter stereotypical scientist, right? Just increasing the odds that a student maybe starts an interest in science or maintains that interest because they can see where they may fit into a STEM field. Another sort of I hesitate to say solution, but moving in the right direction. Being aware of culturally relevant teaching helps students to see how science relates to their lives. Oftentimes, a question that's asked is, why do we need to know this? Why do I need to know this? Right? So tapping into what maybe students know already and how it relates to their lives, and linking the material again, it just helps to solidify and have students build that confidence and say, hey, well, oh, this relates to this in my life, or so I know something about this. And so when faculty use inclusive teaching practices, they're using um, or highlighting awareness and bringing awareness to how systematic inequalities affect our students and the experience of these learning spaces. And so chemistry, biology, engineering, all of these STEM fields can seem so foreign to students, um, and be so foreign to what they have previously experienced. And I think it's the same for higher education in general. You know, especially if you have first generation students, there are several norms and right mentioned the hidden curriculum to higher education in general that students need to know in order to succeed and not struggle. And so that has to be brought forth and brought sort of into the light, and students um, have students be exposed to the resources that they need to succeed. And so we can help students develop this self-awareness that leads to a stronger science identity, and also understand where privilege or even implicit bias exists. And lastly, this universal design for learning principles, um, this was sort of alluded to also in one of the books we read earlier with the Center for Teaching Excellence on inclusive teaching. But adding structure to courses, having supportive um, course structures in terms of flexible deadlines, multiple ways of displaying knowledge, or having multiple forms of assessment, different ways that students can interact with the material, all improves the not only just the grades, but the retention of students in these classes. And again, universal design, because it can be applied to any area, any classroom, and having transparent learning goals and policies is always helpful, allowing students to, again, make mistakes during the learning process, so that so that we get an accurate representation of what they are learning, not are they checking the box on certain behaviors that we're asking of them. But communicating to students in multiple ways, um, and I would say communicating effectively. We all know what's happened to our attention span in the last couple of years. I no longer cringe if I have to repeat something, because I'm all over the place as well. But it does take intentionality in trying to communicate and make sure that everyone's on the same page. And so, again, these are practices that can be implemented, and has been shown to disproportionately help underrepresented students. And I was trying to think, so like there's been a switch in gender, right, in terms of the number of um, women who are in college versus men. And so in some areas, underrepresented students include men for higher education. And so these incorporating these universal design elements has been shown to help the underrepresented population as a whole, but it helps all students, right? It's something that all students can benefit from. And so, like I said, my sort of lens is from the STEM area, but there's a lot of work still to be done. One, because we can, we're in higher education. A lot of the earlier work has been done on middle schools. In middle school students, seeing what the perception of a scientist is when they start to lose interest in STEM fields. But, seeing how that science identity is nurtured and when it is formed from a college level would be really interesting. And I think looking at my career or um, progress up to this point, I could see where having a strong science identity and therefore considering myself as a scientist or as a chemist would be really important when met with these different barriers and microaggressions and discrimination that can come from several different areas. And so, with that, I'd like to thank you for your attention. I'd be happy to answer any questions. Um, but that's all I have.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Would anyone like to open up with a question? I'll give people a second to shout out if they want to talk. Oh, I see some good comments too. Yeah, awesome. You want to ask a question, Stacy?
Hi, Brittany. Hi, everyone. I don't really have a question. I just really wanted to just thank you for this topic. It's such an important one. And as you know, I do psychological research, which tends to kind of be on the fringes of STEM, even though it's very STEMmy. But yeah, thank you so much for this important topic.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you.
I was going to ask you if you know, because I mean, I loved the pictures you had, and just especially asking children, like, what are their images of a scientist? Because I mean, that's even like, I mean, I saw that even in my own children. It's like impossibly smart, which is also sort of always associated with very male. But I mean, I have noticed, just like I love to, because I'm someone coming from the humanities, but like I love to watch Nova, for example. And I do like it is definitely visible over the last 5-10 years that they are making a concerted effort to get a wider representation of scientists in those shows, which I think is great. But it did strike me, like, compared with, because I know that like younger children are getting these positive images of greater diversity in the sciences. But you had mentioned just your own experience at UNC Chapel Hill and how that feeling of mismatch can come at any point. And so I guess I just wanted to ask, and you may not know, but because it's great for like institutions in society to be creating these images, but it also really matters who students are seeing in the classroom with them, who's actually there sitting next to them. And do you know, are there concerted efforts like at the institutional level to try to, I don't know exactly how you do that, because if 85% of the students applying to these programs are white male, like what are they going to do? But anyway, I was just sort of curious.
Sure. No,
Yeah, to hear your comments about that.
yeah. There are, I would say, some of the standard scholarships. So, for example, the American Chemical Society, they have diversity scholars and programs. So I believe there are programs out there to support at least racial minorities in programs, like specifically like that. But it then again brings up the question, okay, how are they advertising it? How do people know about it? So, and the importance of mentors. So I went to a small, Loyola was like a small-ish liberal arts college. And so I knew my professors, and my professors introduced me to some opportunities that got me an internship or that got me funding for something. And so, yeah, if you don't have sort of that network, and right, you
Mhm.
keep having to go back and back and back. But if you don't have that network, then on the surface, it could say, okay, yeah, we're making an effort because we have this funding and things like that. But if you're not um, meeting students where they are, then I think you don't have much change, or as much change as you would like to see. Um, but yeah, it's a tough one. It's a tough one, even in the sense of recruiting for your staff or faculty to try to increase diversity there. You have to
Mhm.
consider what I've seen is a lot of mismatch of the culture once the person's there, right? So you
Sure.
can have all of the intentions of wanting to increase diversity, but are you even aware of some of the issues that might arise, um, just in differences of culture, or everyone talks about an institutional culture, but it's not. You have to make sure that matches, I would think, before um, just bringing in people just to say, okay, we have increased our diversity. And so that's kind of like, I remember someone was mentioning um, the fifth annual Equity and Inclusion Conference we just had. So yeah, that whole
Mhm.
beyond checking a box, and so going
Right.
going deeper there. Yeah.
Of course. Yeah, hugely important.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's awesome. Excellent. Well, yeah, I mean, I guess it's just you got to push at it from every direction, and slowly those classrooms will naturally become more diverse, but based on equality, not box checking, right?
Right, right. And
Mhm.
so that whole concept of equity, and I try to make sure I say equity instead of
Mhm.
equality, because just in the terms of what I see with students who, if there's a minor accommodation that will allow students to be on a level playing field, it's not saying
Mhm.
that every student needs the same accommodation, but equity gives students what they need sort of when they need
Mhm.
it, so that they can, even out the playing field there. So I'm
Exactly.
not going to go into sports analogies because I will fail.
Were there any other comments? Well, okay, I'll ask one more, but only because other people aren't speaking up. Otherwise, people should interrupt me, please. You made me think a bit, and again, of this idea of like how everyone views the scientist as impossibly smart, right? And in general, in academia, we can kind of have imposter syndrome anyway.
Mhm.
And I have read, like, just in general, like books I've read about, say, women in leadership, that women have a tendency to feel very self conscious, kind of promoting themselves or like bragging
Mhm.
about their accomplishments and in or taking credit for things they have done. Obviously, you can't paint with a broad brush. We're all individuals, but I was curious if you had experienced just as a scientist, especially and a chemist, which organic chemist, which is like famously so hard and only impossibly smart people could ever understand it or pass this class. Like, do you feel like this is something that this can create kind of a doubling down sort of imposter syndrome
Mhm.
among women scientists? Or I was just sort of curious because like I'm in literature, which is much more female, I think, of a
Mhm.
field. Anyway, I was just sort of curious.
I know, when I was in graduate school, I was there 2009. I think I graduated 2009. So 2005, 2009. And
Hmm.
we didn't have these fancy names. I wish
Right.
we did. So I think, excuse me, I think I saw a lot of, um, we were more balanced on gender in terms of um, our program, but I saw a lot of anxiety and stress about being in the number one school in analytical chemistry, right?
Hmm.
So I naively applied to schools using US News and World Report, I was like, oh, I want to go into analytical. I'll just apply to the top 5 analytical
Mhm.
schools. And I got into all of them, visited. UNC seemed
Mhm.
nice, but I still wasn't, but right, they still let me in by mistake, right? It's like you
Of course.
you undercut your achievements, and that's a lot of what imposter syndrome and stereotype threat is. You brush away your accomplishments and things like that. And I think it is because, we are not encouraged to be assertive, or like you mentioned in the leadership role, it can be viewed, this whole women have to be liked by everyone type of
Mhm.
thing. So it is like it's a constant noise, I would say, in the background. I definitely haven't gotten over it completely. A lot of what I found works is just faking it until you make it. Um,
Exactly.
so even with this presentation, it's like, okay, because I'm a senior researcher, I'm a senior lecturer, but there's no research component. But this is just something I'm very interested
Mhm.
in looking at in the future, and something that I think, like I said, with the scientist spotlight, that's something that easy that can be
Mhm.
introduced into a lecture course and not take too much time from content, but something that would introduce to students that there is this other image of scientists
Right.
out there. Um, and just being present and letting them know, because so I don't think I knew until high school that there were doctors that weren't medical doctors. So I
Yeah.
did I did a program at Xavier University in New Orleans the summer before I was taking chemistry 1, and a lady came in, Dr. So and so, to introduce us to the chemistry program that we were going to be doing. And I was like, "Where's her stethoscope?" I'm like, "Why do they have a
Mhm.
medical doctor teaching this?"
Mhm.
And so I was a sophomore. No, I was a freshman summer before my sophomore year, before I knew what like a PhD
Wow.
person was.
Mhm.
And so if I hadn't had that chance encounter, so it's all about
Right.
representation and showing and exposing students to everything that's out there, which is just a challenge. But, I think that's what a lot of these initiatives are trying to do.
Yeah. No, yeah, very, very important. Opening a lot more doors.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. Well, thank you so much. Well, I will keep my mouth shut. If anyone else has any final questions or comments, please speak up. If not, okay, great. Well, I can say that even if you felt like an imposter coming in, it was an
Oh,
excellent
good.
and super interesting. And really,
Thank
I do
you.
thank you, given that I know it's not part of your job description even to do this kind of thing, but it really was super educational for us,
Yeah.
and I really enjoyed it.
Thank
So
you so
thank you
much.
so much for your time, and we will be posting this. Before signing off, everyone who's in here, if you didn't send us your name and you wanted to receive lecture credit for the speaker credit series, please just send that in before you sign off, and we'll pass that information along. Thank you so much, Brittany. We
Great.
really
Thank
loved it.
you. Thank you for
Mhm.
inviting me. Appreciate it.
Yes, you have a wonderful day.
Thank you. You too.